Okay, I think we will just jump in. So, welcome everyone. On behalf of Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative and RefugePoint and Talent Beyond Boundaries Canada, I'm pleased to start this webinar on labor mobility. So, my name is Lara Dyer, and I am Chief Solutions Officer for the Americas region for Talent Beyond Boundaries. We're a global nonprofit organization that is dedicated to refugee labor mobility as a complementary pathway to humanitarian resettlement. I'm very pleased to have a wonderful panel today to share their insights and experience working specifically on refugee labor mobility. So we're going to jump right in, but just to introduce our panelists very briefly, we have Lara White, who is the Senior Specialist for Labor Migration in International Organization for Migration's Lebanon Country Office. And Lara has a lot of experience overseeing programming to support regular migration pathways, including complementary labor pathways for Syrian refugees. Ruto Lyoba is Managing Director for the East Africa Institute of Welding, which is a training institute just on the outskirts of Nairobi in Kenya. And I had the pleasure of visiting with him and his team in early November. Abdallah Dawood is Impact Manager for the refugee portion of work done by the North Pine Foundation, which is a philanthropic foundation in Canada. And they fund a number of refugee serving organizations doing incredible work in Canada. And last but not least, Stephen Harrison is CEO of Tri-County Mennonite Homes, which is a multi-site campus of seniors care or long-term care homes in southwestern Ontario. So with that, we will start our questions about today's topic, and I'm going to start with Stephen. Stephen, can you comment on whether you think there's potential to scale labor mobility for refugees? This is something that often comes up in international discussions. And what for the potential to scale, what would that take from an employer perspective?
Sure, and thank you and welcome everybody. Scalability, absolutely, there is opportunity to scale. And from an employer's perspective, let me just add a couple comments. I was just recently in Kenya with Lara and team back in early November, I guess, taking a look at training facilities, opportunities to work with regulatory colleges, and um, evaluating curricula and evaluating the standard of education that exists that folks are being trained under in Kenya, with an eye to how that could translate to the Canadian marketplace, and in particular in my world in seniors care in Ontario. Um, I see nothing but potential and opportunity there, from completion of NCLEX training and certification in Kenya for nurses, all the way through to how support workers are being trained in the education that's being provided to them. But beyond that, from an employer's perspective, scaling up is something that we all need to really take to heart. We are in Canada on the other end of a demographic curve. We have a predominantly aging population, and we are seeing even the healthcare workers who live here in Canada starting to retire and starting to move out of the workforce. And so we have a pretty big need, large need right now for healthcare workers across Canada, and not only in the seniors care world, but in hospitals and other care environments. So from an employer's perspective, scaling up requires a couple of things. It requires employers to be bold and courageous and seek opportunities where they exist, and they do exist in Kenya. It requires an employer to think differently. In Canada, we have not historically been a country, we've always founded ourselves on immigration, but we haven't been a country that's really embraced the idea of new and different ways of thinking and evaluating people for the skills and the talents that they have. We've always said, well, you need Canadian experience. You need to have lived in Canada and all these other kinds of comments. I'm sure many of you have heard. The reality is none of that's true. What it requires is an employer to take the bold step forward to say, I can see that you have a desire and I can see that you have those talents. And we as employers need to then stand up and engage with you and work with you on your terms about what you need from an employment opportunity and then match those skills and those opportunities to what we're looking for. Um, our experience has been thus far in 2023. Lara and I traveled to Kenya and we've already hired folks from Kenya to come and work in our organization. Um, they have established themselves wonderfully in our community. And that's the larger community, not just where they work, but in the community where they live as well. And it for us, it was our first, as an organization, it was our first attempt to do this work. It has gone really well. We've learned lots from them, and we're going to take that learning and expand that as we start to look forward to further hiring. We have job offers that are on the verge of going out the door right now from our last trip, and we're looking to come back probably within the next year to continue that path forward. So, from an employer's perspective, I see nothing but potential and opportunity here. And I look forward to working with our colleagues in Kenya and all of you to try and make those opportunities become a reality for everyone.
Great. Thanks so much. And I'm going to turn next to Ruto because we want to make sure that these opportunities are not just being moved forward in healthcare, where there's definitely lots of potential, as Stephen has highlighted. But we did have the opportunity to visit Ruto and his team, and they are in the skilled trades area. So Ruto, if you can share what your institute is doing, that would be great. And also, I'm going to tag on my second question for you, which is we often hear concerns in refugee labor mobility discussions about brain drain or kind of the propensity for destination countries to bring people from refugee hosting countries who have skills, and then what does that what's the impact of that on the economies of the hosting countries? So if you could speak to that as well, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lara. So my name, as you heard, my name is Ruto Lioba. I'm the managing director of East African Institute of Welding, a premier welding institution in Kenya. Probably we have only one competitor. So we set up in 2017, and as you heard in the medical area, curriculum is always an issue. So for us, okay, let me start with the experience first of all. So we've trained over, say, 300 welders. We started off when oil and gas was discovered in the north of Kenya. So we had our first, cohort of students who came, about 70 to 100 of them. Obviously, because oil and gas is very high safety standards, quality-wise, we were requested by the employer, who was a company called Talo, that is quoted in the English stock exchange, to uplift our standards. So we had to send our trainers, to South Africa, South African Institute of Welding. So we have a relationship with South African Institute of Welding. We actually use the International Institute of Welding curriculum that's coordinated out of Johannesburg, South Africa. So so that's one of the sort of benefits of globalization, if you want to call it that. Back to the issue, and I'll just quickly see if I can quickly put a presentation in terms of the details of what we need. I don't know if I've just sent a request for a quick presentation in terms of molarity of lack thereof, but let me just give you an example. We trained 300 to 400 people since our inception. So we worked with Talo, an oil and gas company out of, like I said, the UK. And, unfortunately, because of various reasons, we were not able to, the pipeline, the idea was to train these guys in the pipeline route. Unfortunately, as it didn't come to pass. And so we have 300 to 400 people out in the system who are trained to very high level of trading. And maybe 20% of them are still working in the oil and gas, or rather in the welding space. And why? Is because the project didn't come off. So there is your answer already, that we have the potential to have enough capacity to both meet our local needs and the international needs. So quickly, if you go through this slide you see there, these are just facts that I got off a small research that I did. In Kenya, 70% of our youth are actually between 75 and 80% of them are less than 35 years old. Can you imagine that? 75 to 80%. There's a huge number. So I will quickly go through sort of the philosophy of migration, labor morality of it, the benefit, who does it really benefit? So I'll just quickly go through it. Next slide, please. I don't know if there's somebody who's doing it for me. Or I'm doing it for myself here, okay. Yeah, so who really wins? The fact, the individual is the initial winner short term. Obviously, they get higher salary, better working conditions, they have access to technology. We don't have robotics enough. Okay, South Africa probably, and maybe North Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa, probably not. All right. And of course, they get an improved quality of life. So, of course, for them, it's self-interest. They're the first winners. The second winner is, if I can just get this next slide going, page down, is a host country. So the taxpayers of, be it Canada, be it the US, wherever, they get ready talent without bearing the initial cost of training these guys. Of course, it fills labor shortages, and of course, it contributes to the host country GDP. And as you've heard, big chunk of the Western world, mature population. When you get younger guys who are contributing to the pension scheme, it's a win-win. So again, for the taxpayers of Canada, or whichever country it is we're talking about, self-interest. The other thing is, to sort of mitigate this, and we'll talk about that. One of the things that we can do, obviously, is that's what we're discussing with Lara and her team, is to see how they can help us co-sponsor or fit the bill for training these guys. So it'll be a win-win for them. The individual wins, the Canadian taxpayer wins because they're getting ready labor instead of getting refugees who have to come and draw on the your what do you guys call it, your compensation, where you pay off to people who are unemployed. No, they contribute to that. So it's a win-win for here we'll call it a host country. The third country, the third team, obviously, is the host country wins, our taxpayers here. So when we train people, there is obviously one of the downsides, let me put it that way, is a brain drain. But if we're smart enough, and I think the government of Kenya has been smart enough now to realize that this is a potential opportunity. It has signed bilateral labor agreements with Canada, with Germany, with Italy, with all kinds of countries. So they know that it's a potential for remittances. Today, surprise, surprise, remittances from overseas have surpassed our main income, dollar income streams, coffee and tea and tourism. So in 2025, year to date, $5 billion US. All right. So what can we do to mitigate the first point there, where we mitigate brain drain? We can train enough of them. As I've mentioned before, 400 or so plus or minus welders are out there. Only 20% of them are employed right now. Why? We train them to such high levels. The expectations of compensation is so high. They spend so much money, and now they're unable to be absorbed by the system. Our economy is not sophisticated enough to be able to absorb these high-end trained people. So for the government of Kenya, all we need to do is make sure we invest in vocational schools, have returnee programs where they come back, they add value, they've been trained, they have experience, win for the whole sending country. Of course, we need to leverage private sector. Many guys, Germans, spent almost a month in a hotel in Nairobi trying to align the curriculums, etc., and it never came to be. Problem, obviously, the government, let me put this, be polite. Our standards of education are not high enough to be able to get them to go to Canada or whichever country. But for us, being nimble, private sector, we were able to get contact with the South African Institute of Welding, and we are working now with Canadian Welding Bureau. So that way, because we are nimble, well, let's put it this way: we are for profit, but also we have a social angle. When we see people benefiting, changing their lives, we appreciate that very much. And Lara could attest to that. There's a Somali lady who is, dressed in her buibui, but she can put on a safety helmet, gloves on, and overalls, and she can be able to weld. And we see that as a benefit as well. So next slide, if I just go, I know my time is 7 minutes. Sorry. So in summary, we can make it a win-win, all right? This flow of ideas let me just check that this is the next slide quickly. Okay, so in summary, these ideas flow of globalization, guys leaving Kenya, going to Canada, working there. Kenya is a very, very pleasant country. Most Kenyans love to come back home. So they would go there for training, work, and then come back at the end of the day. So they add value to our society. So the exchange of ideas. Of course, it enhances global innovation. Over West and the individual are the clearest winners, but the sending country too can be a winner if we are smart. Like we mentioned it, mitigation, invest in training, and both by the sending and the host country. And in this country, host country we're referring to is Canada. Of course, we need to add value to these people before they go. Sorry to use that term. It looks like they're commodities. I apologize for that. But get them trained wherever they are and get them to Canada. That way, the host country benefits and their taxpayers benefit. The morality of it all, individuals' rights. We cannot, when a guy says they want to go out of the country, there's nothing you can do about that. You cannot force somebody to stay in the country. We are a democratic country. Forcing skilled labor people, in an under-resourced, mismanaged country, somebody has paid top dollar to get themselves trained. We give them the freedom to do that. So, in conclusion, for us, we think it's a win-win all round, and we're not ashamed to have a model where we train people and excess ones going abroad. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Ruto. And maybe if we have time to come back, I'd like to dig in a little bit more into the partnership that you have with the Canadian Welding Bureau. I think that's a really interesting model. Speaking of great models, I'm going to go to Lara White from IOM and just ask you to share a little bit of your experience working in a different context.
Great. Thanks, Lara. And I'm very pleased to be here. So in terms of IOM, just for those who aren't aware of our organization, IOM is the United Nations Migration Agency, and it was created in 1951 to help deal with mass migration from Europe. And Canada was a founding member state. Currently, we have 175 member states with about 440 field locations in 170 countries. And really, IOM's foundational work or our work is founded in the idea that migration has been a defining aspect of the human condition and of human history and has shaped society's economies for the history of time. So migration is not a new phenomenon. It's just people have always been on the move. And what we aim to do is to really improve, make sure that the any kind of development aspects or gains from migration are maximized, and also to prevent irregular migration or minimize exploitation of migrants or people who are on the move. We talk about migrants, but really this is just people who are on the move. We know that also that regular migration pathways, which is the topic of today's discussion, really enable people to work, to move in line with legal and policy frameworks that have been established by member states. So as a general principle of international governance of migration, it's up to states to decide who enters their country and for which purposes. And this management can happen at the national, regional, or global levels. And so we work with our member states and other states to establish new regular pathways, both for refugees, but also pathways for non-refugees. And that might be people who don't fall under the criteria of the 51 Convention, but who have a desire to move, maybe because of lack of opportunity or due to climate or other reasons. So we have a long history of facilitating labor mobility, again, both temporarily, so for migrant workers, and also permanently, so for refugees or those interested in permanent relocation. And in our program design, we take a multi-stakeholder and migrant-centered and rights-based approach to migration. And I think it's important, this multi-stakeholder element is really important. That's why I'm so pleased to be on this panel today with representatives from a variety of different groups. There's an expression that we often use that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And this is very much true of migration and particularly labor mobility. And we believe that we can go far, and it's of great benefit, obviously, to the people who find themselves employed in countries of destination, but also to the communities of destination themselves who have acute labor shortages. We know that, for example, and it's already been raised, that there are, demographic challenges in a lot of the OECD countries, including Canada, but also East Asia and also China. So we're embarking on a global shift demographically that's going to have severe impacts in terms of production, but also in terms of healthcare and of education and of basic needs of societies. So, meanwhile, at the same time, we know that there are communities of people who have been displaced, either due to conflict or due to climate or environmental devastation. And these people really just want an opportunity to start over. Now, I work in Lebanon's country office, and the project that we have, the one that I'm leading, is called Abiona. It's the Roman goddess who safeguards travelers. And it's been funded by the government of Italy. And it looks to basically provide opportunities for Syrians who are in Lebanon. Now, Lebanon has hosted traditionally 1.5 million Syrians for the last 14, 15 years. And that's the largest proportion right, they are the largest refugee hosting country per capita of any country in the world. Not the largest refugee population, but the largest per capita. At the same time as experiencing political and economic strife, conflict. There was the Beirut port explosion. There's been a lot of hardship experienced by the Lebanese people, and yet still they have hosted this large population of Syrians. And so we're really trying to find permanent solutions, or what we call durable solutions, for Syrians in Lebanon, and also to help alleviate the pressure that's being put on the Lebanese people. Now, some of the challenges, and this is also, sorry, just to underscore again, part of this is, to ensure that people's rights are protected throughout the migration process, but also to try and dissuade irregular migration. There's been a lot of media coverage of people who are desperate, who are getting on boats and walking through the Darien Gap in Central America and who are paying human smugglers to smuggle them. And we want to basically facilitate regular migration so that people don't have to do that, and instead invest in their futures in a way that safeguards their safety. So some of the challenges, I would say, would be that there's, the programs. We've done some analysis of the existing programs, and there's most of them they take a long time, and they're also quite costly. So this can be a disincentive for employers, particularly for SMEs. We're looking towards, where are our labor market opportunities for Syrians in Lebanon? And often it is small and medium-sized enterprises. They're the ones who have a really hard time finding people, particularly if they're in rural communities, but they're also the ones with the least capacity. They don't have big HR units to facilitate migration, and so they often needed additional help. And so it creates a bit of a high touch program. Um, and also just to say that all of these programs, because they exist, the ones that exist globally, including Canada's various streams, they're labor market responsive. So they begin with employer commitment. And so it's really important to try and create these um, partnerships with private sector employers, and that can be really challenging. And again, particularly with the small and medium-sized enterprises, and also because of the length of time of programming, it really requires long-term planning. So how is it that workers who are coming in are going to be part of a medium or long-term plan for their workforce? And I'd say also there's like concerns from employers, rightfully so, about retention. They want to make sure that they're investing when they invest in workers, that those workers they stay not only in with the employer, but also with the community. Because again, it takes a lot of actors, and it takes all levels of government, and including municipalities and school systems and housing authorities to try and facilitate these programs. Now, I know in our program, we focus on basically four core pillars. So the first is skills development. So understanding that helping to bridge the gaps that Syrians and Lebanons face and to try and level the playing field so that they're competitive. And that would be through vocational and language training primarily. And then the second is job matching. We've partnered with Talent Beyond Boundaries to help facilitate job matching. And then after job offers have been received and accepted, and we believe strongly in ensuring that people have adequate pre-employment and pre-departure information so that they can make informed decisions about where they're going and to make the right decision for them. So, for example, do they want to move to Canada? Do they understand what it might be to live in a rural community in the north? Um, Particularly if they don't have family members or a diaspora group to basically to welcome them. So after job matching, we go into the kind of migration planning piece, which is looking at applications for visa, getting people's paperwork in order, again, that pre-departure orientation, making sure that people are ready to hit the ground running when they arrive, and lining up accommodation and working with the employers and whatever settlement services we're also working with. And that would be the final phase. And that would be in our Abiona program, is looking at and supporting resettlement and making sure that the needs of the worker and their family and also the employer are being met, and trying to mitigate any issues as they come up. And I think I'll stop there. I have more I could add, but I don't want to take any more time right now. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Lara. We'll do a second round, depending on some of the questions too. So maybe for all the panelists, just as we move to Abdullah, if you can be checking out the questions in the chat too, and kind of prepping for those, that would be great as well. But over to Abdullah, and I know that Abdullah has been working in this space for quite a while, more recently with North Pine, but he's got a very rich background and lots of experience working with refugees in employment context. So over to you, and can you share some of your experience and also some of the both opportunities and challenges that you see around labor mobility?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the intro, and thanks for inviting me and the colleagues. It's very humble to be upon such committed people to refugees all around the world. And again, I apologize for my voice. I thought I was over this cold, but it keep coming back. So I sound a bit nasally. I sound much better than this, I promise. Um, so yeah, as Laura said, I've been working in the refugee space for quite a while. I myself came as a refugee to Canada quite a while ago. When it comes to economic mobility, it's always been a tough, not a cookie to crack in the Canadian context. Entering the Canadian job market is not easy, especially as a refugee or somebody who has foreign experience. Um, Canadians really value Canadian experience in the marketplace. And no matter how much policies that we put through or changes or advocacy that we push the private sector to try to recognize more foreign experience, it seems to kind of fall on deaf ears. So with the APB program, the one that Lara's working on as well, and some of my colleagues, it's a very interesting way to kind of crack that cookie and then kind of solve that problem. And it's very, very tough to keep a humanitarian context and also match labor mobility needs without having exploitation, right? People always forget that, like, when there's desperation for mobility and migration, as Laura White says, we see all this irregular migration, we see people become more desperate. There are employers who exploit that. There are bad faith actors in the area who will see that and who will try to exploit someone's labor through not paying them or not safe work practices. Programs like this and formalizing pathways like this also combats that, and that's what I've seen on the field. When we reach out to employers and create a more dedicated, structured pathway, one that we also follow through on, and ones that we actually see we're replacing individuals and get their feedback and see how they progress, especially when they come from this vulnerable position or vulnerable state. It's quite important. It's a really good way to combat the what we see as the opposite of that in the field and exploitation with these workers. So more often than not, back in before I was at North Pine, we deal with a lot of asylum seekers who would come to Canada and claim, and because of their vulnerable status, because they're still waiting for their work permit, because they couldn't get their papers in a row quick enough, and they needed to get employment. More often than not, an employer would see, okay, yeah, they're skilled, and I can get that at a much cheaper rate, and I can do it under the table. And more often than not, they get exploited. So having actual structured pathways not only combats or not only helps alleviate the pressures that the country is seeing from irregular migration, which is tough because it's unpredictable, right? We are always quick to critique, but it's tough for Canada to react when all of a sudden we have 10 to 15,000 people all at once at our border. We want to be in a respond to that in the most humanitarian way possible, but also we don't have the mechanisms to in the same way because it's unpredictable. So a way to restrict, not restrict, I say I would regularize this type of pattern is to create more and more and more pathways. And this, what we had in Canada was an exemplar, great success story of that happening. We were able to create North Pine, funded with the help of Lara and Taliban boundaries, create these pathways that I think were unprecedented in Canada and helped really showcase that things can be done in a more organized fashion and in a quicker fashion as well. And while still upholding the dignity and the rights of the refugee coming to Canada, and at the same time also touching upon that retention piece. So as a funder right now, in my current new position, that's always something that we look at, and that's always something that we want to continue to do, is find a way to regularize pathways and in a more creative fashion to fill up more economic needs, because Canada is an aging population. Canada is seeing labor shortages all around. Outside of the main three cities. When everyone thinks of Canada, they just think of Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. But we're a pretty big country. We have all the different cities, and there's a huge aging population throughout Canada. Like me and Lara were just in Winnipeg, and the needs that are there are quite large. And it just makes sense. It just makes perfect sense in a very idealistic world to try to ensure that those labor needs are met in a humane and ordered fashion with refugee talent from all around the world. And I know I don't want to take up too much time, and I want to leave some time for Q&A. So I'll end it there, and hopefully my voice doesn't run out by that time.
Great, thanks, Abdullah. That's super helpful too. So thank you to all of the panelists. I just have been perusing the questions, and we've got some great ones coming in. Maybe to address a number of them, I'll just kind of in general talk about the kinds of partnerships and networks that are available for supporting both employers and candidates to navigate the journey. So I think Ruto is a great example of training that is available in the refugee hosting countries. And Steve mentioned that we were able to visit a number of polytechnic organizations when we were in Nairobi, and they're offering amazing training. And this just helps the candidates to be trained at a standard that is readily accepted in a destination country. So speaking on behalf of Canada in particular, but the same is true for Germany, Italy, Australia, the UK. There's lots of needs in very similar occupations, so healthcare, skilled trades, as well as a variety of other areas. We recently were recruiting for a pet groomer in Northern Ontario, which was a bit of a unicorn role, but just shows the diversity of the employer demand as well as the rich candidate pool. And all of us who are working in this space really do coordinate to provide an end-to-end process. So from the candidate outreach and identification, the training, the job matching, the immigration piece, right through, as I think Lara was mentioning, we partner with IOM for the actual relocation piece. There's pre-arrival training that's provided to the candidates. There's post-arrival support that's provided. And what I really love about this space is it's not just one organization, but there's a network of organization, including amazing employers who are really doing a lot to make sure that their candidates are a good fit for their team, but also have everything that they need post-arrival to settle well into the organizations and into the communities. So I see a number of questions. So panelists, if you would take a look at those and address the ones that are specifically sent to you, that would be great. And I know some are being answered.
Yeah, there's just one. Someone asked,
Yeah.
Lulinda, you asked about how we train the refugees. So what happened was, I probably didn't emphasize this long enough. So when we set up, we established the East African Institute of Welding. One of our first partners was ILO, and ILO, obviously being a UN organization, gave us access to some refugees in Kakuma and Lokichogio who came to our institution. Many of them, about 100 of them. So it is quite a handful to manage all these guys. And, Lara had asked, what are some of the challenges that we experienced? So if you just give me 2 minutes, I'd like to explain that. One of the challenges, obviously, is, getting the many countries, specifically Germany, came and they couldn't find an institution that matched up to the standards, and they were going through government institutions. But when you come to the private sector, for a variety of reasons, and we mentioned, agility, obviously there's a bit of profit motive, we just work that much harder, and we're able to partner with, like I mentioned, South African Institute of Welding, using a curriculum, And, by a stroke of luck, we actually just bumped into the Canadian Welding Bureau. Lara, you're asking something, you commented about the Canadian Welding Bureau. So one of our former students, wanted, a job, and, they went online and they found that there was a school that was South African, a school in South Africa that was offering CWB testing facilities. And then they told us, oh, by the way, this has happened in South Africa. Can you guys do the same in Kenya? And then we just, contacted CWB in Canada. They responded. We did an audit, and we passed. And now we are an accredited training institution that can certify students to the CWB standard. And that makes life much easier for employers, for Lara and a job matching team to be able to place people so that language is the same between ourselves and specifically the Canadian one. So we're working to work with the International Institute of Welding. So in our business, different countries have different standards, but at least for North America, we know AWS, American Welding Society, and the Canadian Welding Bureau, they are in the same pot, quite similar. But in Europe, they use different, Germany has theirs, et cetera, but they have one. Either you use the ISO or you use the International Institute of Welding. So through our partnership with the South African Institute of Welding, we are able to access, the curriculum, and we'll be able to offer IIW diplomas out of our school probably in 2026. So that way we'll be able to spread and see if we can be able to get our trainees opportunities in Europe as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for that, Ruto. Steve, there's a question in the chat for you, and I also just wanted to ask you to kind of pick up on the theme that Ruto introduced, which is the importance to employers of knowing that the training that's provided, in my case outside of Canada, but same for German employers or Italian employers, knowing that the training that's been provided, let's say in Kenya or Uganda or Malawi, I'm picking up on some of the
questions.
Where people are coming from. But
Yep.
just to be clear, we're also operating in, Colombia and Ecuador and whatever. So this isn't limited to any one particular geographic area. But yeah, how important is it to you as an employer to know that the training being provided to refugees meets Canadian standards in this case?
So, I can speak to long-term care in particular in Ontario, and I think broadly in the healthcare sphere. We are heavily regulated, and there are requirements for us to ensure that education meets the standards that have been stipulated by the colleges as well as the province here in Ontario for individuals who are coming to join our teams, regardless of where they're coming from on the planet. Those requirements are inflexible when it comes down to it. And so knowing the curriculum and understanding quite clearly how people are trained, what that training looks like, what the curriculum is, and then ensuring that there is a match between that curriculum and the needs and the requirements here in Ontario is we don't get a lot of flexibility on that at all. However, what I will say is where we have looked, and I've had the benefit of traveling with Lara and team to Kenya as well as to South America to look at different opportunities and different educational structures that exist, where there are gaps, and there are always gaps. And I will say this not because it is because anyone is being trained outside of Canada. Even within Canada, between our provinces, there are gaps in training and education that happen from one province or jurisdiction to another. Our commitment as an employer, and to pick up on Abdullah's comment earlier, there are good employers and there are maybe not so good employers out there. We are an employer that prides ourselves in supporting our teams and being engaged with our teams, not only at a professional level, but also at a personal level. And I don't mean that we try and meddle in people's lives. We want to make sure that everyone is satisfied, stable, engaging in the community, feeling welcomed. And that also includes ensuring that where there were any potential gaps in education, that we fill those and we give opportunity to support that education. So ourselves as an organization, We are investing, we're building a brand new long-term care home, at least one, possibly two or three, but starting with one. And as part of that growth, we are also building a training center as part of that to ensure that not only international recruits, but also our Canadian recruits have the opportunity to continue to develop their skills and grow with us. Healthcare, like any other, whether it's the welding industry or any other industry, is not static. What you learned when you were in school, you need to continually develop your education and your thinking around and learn new skills to support changing needs. And so we believe in that fundamentally as an organization and are building a living classroom where we can continue to develop those skills and that work with everybody. In addition to that, we are also toying with the idea. We have not established this formally yet. Earlier, I made a comment about, and Abdullah touched on this as well. Canada's a tough nut to crack. Sometimes people say, well, you don't have Canadian experience. How do we know that your experience will meet the Canadian needs? What I would like to start to do is, as we ramp up our international recruitment, is I would like to start to send some of my team from Canada to Kenya or other places to be part of understanding the education that's provided. And then on top of that, also investing themselves into um, training up and giving the Canadian understanding experience what it will be like to work in Canada to folks before they arrive so they can make a really wise decision as to whether Canada is the place they want to be, but also dispelling some of that conversation around, you don't have any Canadian experience. Well, you can't get experience unless someone gives it to you or you get the opportunity to try. So our philosophy right now is shifting a little bit of towards the notion of we will bring some of that opportunity to experience the Canadian work environment elsewhere. So send our staff, send our experience from Canada elsewhere, and then talk to people about what our expectations are, how that works, where those gaps are in education, how we can train up before you come to Canada, and what that will look like when you arrive. Because there are some incredibly well trained and experienced individuals that I have met all over this planet. And a barrier should not be that you haven't resided in Canada before you had the opportunity to offer your skills to the world. So we're going to try and find a way around that, working with Lara and team from TBB and hopefully IOM and others to start to make that educational opportunity and that experience opportunity happen outside of Canada. So when you come to Canada, you can be that nurse or that support worker or social worker or whatever your formal training is when you come into the healthcare sphere.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Stephen. And I just want to address some of the comments in the chat about specifically labor mobility to Canada. And I want to acknowledge, first of all, that it does always take much longer than any of us would like. And so appreciate patience on behalf of everybody involved, in particular the candidates. If you're a candidate whose job offer was rescinded or withdrawn, please do follow up with RefugePoint or through our website. There's a way to contact our candidate team. I think the email is candidates@talentbeyondboundaries.org. But you can go to our website and let us know there. We are trying to place candidates whose job offers have been withdrawn in other parts of Canada, and we have been successful in some cases. But again, the criteria have to match with the candidate's work experience. The other thing about EMPP and labor mobility in general is that it's employer driven. And so I know it's heartbreaking for us, frankly, and for the organizations that we work with, but mostly for candidates when you have successfully been put forward and an employer interviews you. But when that doesn't move forward to a job offer, I know how devastating that is. The challenge is that in these programs, it is the employer that chooses, and it's not just based on technical skills. It can be a question of a good fit for the team or many other reasons. And then also right now, what is happening is that the EMPP is closed for further intake of applications. So we are working with the government very diligently to try to get the EMPP reopened. It is a great program that has been working very well for both employers and candidates. And it's just a sort of a function of where the immigration planning is with Canada overall. But just wanted to acknowledge that it is a bit of a difficult time, and always it takes longer. It's a much slower process than any of us would wish. So don't lose hope. Continue to update your profiles in the talent catalog, for example. And as organizations, we're continuing to work on solutions. Rucha, I see your hand. I did just want to bring Lara White back into the conversation, if I may, just before. Lara, in particular, I wanted to ask you to speak to how you're working with a variety of partners on Abiona, so like the training partners, and then, with TBB and others to find job matches. And I know we were just in New Brunswick together, speaking with construction stakeholders. So again, I think this interaction of multi-partners, I know you spoke to it already a little bit, but if you could do a deeper dive into that, that would be great. And then we'll go to Ruto just before wrapping up. I think
Sorry, I'd clicked, but it didn't take. I think
There
I'm
you
here
go.
now.
yes,
Um,
good.
So yeah, there are multiple stakeholders involved, including the governments of the country of asylum, including training institutes there. In Lebanon, we have a very robust suite of programs that are part of an entire ecosystem of vocational training available to Lebanese and non-Lebanese individuals living in Lebanon. So there's that ecosystem that then supports people to first of all find as part of their livelihoods programming to be able to get the skills they need to work in Lebanon, and then understanding how that might translate to then opportunities overseas. One of the things as part of the skills mobility working group that we're part of in Lebanon, we realize there's a lot of vocational training. It's all for the Lebanese labor market, and so now we're trying to tailor some of that to foreign labor markets. So, for example, we have a program for solar installation that's been approved by the German government and German stakeholders. And so it's a matter of, mapping out like where there might be gaps in programming and then improving the programming in the country of training, in this case, Lebanon, so that it meets the needs of employers. Part of this is also just, to be honest, it's about translating this. Like when I go I've been to many dairy processing facilities, for example, as part of other programming in Lebanon, and they're all ISO certified, and they have to abide by international standards related to food safety. Those international standards are international. They're the same standards that would be applied in Ontario or New Brunswick or any other, or Italy or any other country of destination. But sometimes employers don't really understand that. They might have a picture in their mind of what training looks like. But when you start to go down that pathward of accreditation and reciprocity. I mean, it's very time intensive, but we believe strongly that by working with our stakeholders in Lebanon, not only will we improve the chances of refugees being placed outside of Lebanon, but also it'll just improve the general training ecosystem for Lebanese employers. So it's a real win on both sides. I think also if we're talking about countries of destination, my goodness, like there are just so many actors involved. I mean, it could be the municipalities. Like we know that you can't just, particularly with small communities, need to make sure that the school systems are prepared, that there's adequate housing, and that we're working with resettlement actors and as well diaspora communities who can be really important in terms of providing that safe space to land, whether it's pastoral care and faith-based groups, but also just to bridge some of the communication gaps, to give people advice on in particular if they themselves were refugees, kind of passing that forward. There's also, settlement services. Of course, I would be negligent if I didn't mention the important role of my sister agencies besides IOM. UNHCR plays an important role in terms of refugee status determination. They also keep a running, I don't want to say inventory, because again, I don't like the commodification of people, but they're the ones with whom Syrians are registered in Lebanon. And so it's very important. They're also the ones that facilitate the exit permit. So, they play an extraordinary role. ILO, GIZ, these are all organizations that are providing training. So there's a lot of moving pieces. And what we're looking for really is, again, a fairly high, like we're creating a high touch program to make sure that it's sustainable and that these are permanent solutions and durable solutions for people who need permanent solutions. So on that note, there was a question, I think, for me. It says question to Lara. I'm going to assume it's Lara White. But what kind of protections would be available to refugees in these labor mobility pathways? That's really important because, we did a mapping exercise to make sure that we were gearing our programming and tailoring our programming for long-term permanent solutions. So that means, like, whether it's, in the Canadian example, people can arrive. They can arrive with permanent residency from the onset. So, and they bring their families with them. Australia operates that way as well. In other countries such as the UK or Belgium or Italy, it might be a two-step process. So they come in on a work permit, and it might be even an employer-specific work permit, but eventually, within a set period of time, there's an opportunity for permanent resettlement. And that question of non-refoulement is really important. We cannot move people to places where, if there's a breakdown in the employer-employee relationship, that they would then be, they would face repatriation, or they would be forced to leave. There has to be those safeguards in place. And as well, we want to encourage and we seek out opportunities in countries where labor laws, for example, apply to all workers, not just nationals. So they apply to nationals, migrant workers, refugees. So, I mean, this is a topic all in itself, and I would love my ILO colleagues to come and join for that. But it's really important that these minimum conditions are met in order before you start even contemplating moving people, because we don't want to put people in harm's way, whether it's, even if it's unintentional. And most countries also have mechanisms. So, for example, if the worst case situation happened and they were at risk of or experiencing exploitation or abuse, most countries have mechanisms to protect those people and to allow them an opportunity to move to another employer, even if it is an employer-specific work permit. But this is quite complex, so I'll stop here. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, I think we could probably go on and on for forever, but we are at time, and so I just want to thank the panelists for sharing your perspectives, and also to the participants for your active engagement. We saw lots and lots of questions, and I hope we went some way to answering them. But feel free to consult our websites, talentbeyondboundaries.org, IOM as well. There's lots of information to follow up with. And also, I just wanted to thank Refugee Self-Reliance and RefugePoint, who hosted this along with Talent Beyond Boundaries. Wonderful discussion, and really important when we're talking about solutions for refugees to include that employer and private sector focus. So thanks, everyone, and wish you all the best for the rest of your day.